Buongiorno, parlo in italiano per adesso, potete mettere le cuffiette. Appena le avete tolte, sorry, I'm speaking English. Ok, buongiorno, sono Simone Arcagni, sono il coordinatore scientifico del festival e sono molto lieto di presentare il talk di oggi. Due brevi note biografiche per voi, per introdurre i nostri ospiti che poi dialogheranno. Simon May insegna filosofia al King's College di Londra. Le sue pubblicazioni sono state pubblicate in oltre 10 lingue. Il libro alla base del dialoghi di oggi è l'unico per adesso, mi auguro per adesso, pubblicato in Italia da Luis University Press e si intitola Carino, il potere inquietante delle cose adorabili, un libro che assolutamente vi consiglio. Gli interessi di Simon May si concentrano sull'etica, la filosofia delle emozioni, le questioni di identità e appartenenza, il pensiero tedesco del XIX e XX secolo con particolare attenzione a Schopenhauer, Nietzsche e Heidegger. Tra i suoi titoli l'etica di Nietzsche, la guerra contro la moralità, Amore, una storia. È inoltre editorialista per diversi giornali, tra cui il The Washington Post e il Financial Times. Abbiamo un ospite di extra lusso per fare le domande a Simon May, Kamilia Kard, è un artista, è docente all'Accademia di Brera, di Belle Arti di Brera di Milano, dove insegna estetica dei nuovi media e comunicazione multimediale. La sua ricerca artistica e teorica si concentra sul modo in cui nuove forme di comunicazione e My Artistic and Theoretical Research scusatemi, è passato dall'italiano all'inglese, scusatemi, forme di comunicazione e l'iperconnettività abbiano influenzato la rappresentazione del sé e il modo di percepire i propri corpi, sensazioni ed emozioni. Quindi vedrete che oggi emozioni e sentimenti saranno un po' alla base dell'incontro. Nel 2022 ha pubblicato il libro Arte e Social Media, creatori di sentimenti per Post Media Data, un altro libro che vi consiglio caldamente. Io mi faccio da parte, lascio la parola ai nostri due ospiti, vi chiedo magari di fare un applauso introduttivo e grazie di essere qua e grazie a voi del pubblico.
Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio a tutti, good afternoon to everybody. So, I'm very happy to be here and talk with Simon. So let's start with the first question. The very obvious question. So when did your interest for the cute begin? And what moved you to undertake this concept in-depth analysis?
Okay, well, it's great to be here. I'm sorry I'm speaking in English. My Italian is very poor. So I'm not sure when I became interested in cute. It was a very quick thing. It was around 2016 or 17, and it arose from someone who I met through my then agent in New York, who was a half Japanese, half French woman, and something about her made me realize it sort of gelled what I'd been vaguely interested in for many years, which was why is it that such a seemingly trivial aesthetic could take over the world in the way that it has? And I then just decided to write a book, and it was the fastest book I ever wrote. I wrote it in about 4 months. I mean, it's quite short. And really my interest, as I say, was to understand what cute says about our world. That's our real interest. You know, why on earth would, you know, in a time of such difficult times, why would an aesthetic like cute become as prominent as it has done? And I then realized that it was something that had really exploded after the Second World War. So it was a fairly new phenomenon.
Thank you. And in the first part of your book, you describe what can be termed the forms of the cute, and what emerges from this analysis is that there is a recurrence, there are some recurrences in these shapes which are the round and chubby forms, shapes. And we can find these forms also in artworks, historical artworks like prehistoric Venus of Willendorf, where the motherhood cult is celebrated with this figurine with a round belly. Otherwise, in some 16th century paintings like Madonna Sistina, in which two cherubs still descend to the Virgin and Jesus with their annoying expressions, and they are seriously cute. Also Fiorucci used them years ago for the campaign. And so on with the portrait of Antonietta Gonzalez by Lavinia Fontana, in which a noble woman with hypertrichosis disease is portrayed in a very reassuring and fluffy ways, in order to, in a way that the people can accept her. So in all these examples, also there were a series of paintings by Tiepolo about who painted children, a lot of children. Nando Borgante by Bronzino. There are a lot of examples about cute in art histories. And well, in those examples, among many, there are some of the topic that you analyze in your book, like the cult of the child, cute and the grotesque, and the fragility of the cute as a medium of mass appeal, and so on. Could you elaborate more this concept?
Okay, sure. So the first thing that's really important to say is that the kind of cute that has taken over the world, so when we're talking about, Detective Pikachu, we're talking about Hello Kitty, we're talking about Mickey Mouse after the Second World War, we're talking about Super Mario the Plumber. I think the most successful film ever made from animation. These are multi-billion-dollar industries. And what we're not talking about is what Kamilia just talked about, which is sweet children, puppies, pandas, and so on. So this is the interesting thing, which is that what has really swept the world has been something less, that's not entirely sweet and harmless, like children, like babies, like the little pandas. And I make a big distinction between, and this distinction really I think only exists in English. So here you would say Carino, in German you would say Zeus, in French you would say mignon, but you don't have two words. In English you have sweet and you have cute, and I've used that to distinguish between, as I say, the kind of babies and pandas and so on, and little kittens, which are very sweet, but those are not the ones that are the huge success post-war. What's the huge success post-war is when you have this ambivalence, unclarity, something uncanny. I don't know if any of you know Freud's concept of the uncanny, which is where the familiar and the unfamiliar abut each other. So we're not quite sure what's going on. And that can be slightly frightening, as he says. And if you look at most of these cute figures that have been so successful, take Hello Kitty, because I'm sure everybody knows that here. What gender is Hello Kitty? Well, strictly speaking, it's a girl, but Hello Kitty also manifests as a kamikaze pilot, for example, a Second World War kamikaze pilot. It can be a gentle character, it can be an aggressive character. So is it good, is it bad? We don't know. Is it human or animal? People think it's a cat. Actually, it's not. It was originally a little girl. Indeed, for some reason, a little British girl. I don't know why, but the Japanese company that invented it, Sanrio, deemed Kitty to be a little British girl. Most people think it's a cat. So you have uncertainty about gender, which is extremely topical today. You have uncertainty about human or animal. you have uncertainty about good or bad, and you have uncertainty about its character. So it's somehow this sense of uncertainty, a kind of harmless uncertainty, and that's crucial, because it explodes after the Second World War, after these 2 world wars of unspeakable violence. And I was thinking when I was coming here today, I mean, here we are talking about cute, which seems perverse at a time when such cruel things are going on in the world. You know, it just seems such a trivial topic. But actually, this is precisely the origin of it after the Second World War, was in this reaction to the horrors of war and the desire for a more peaceful world. And the country which is the capital of cute today, which of course is Japan, which has its own word for it, kawaii, as I'm sure many of you know, the number one objective of Japan after the Second World War, in terms of the image it presents to the world, was to project exactly an image of peaceableness, of a kind of cute peaceableness, if you know what I mean. You know, and very importantly to itself. And I've lived in Japan, and this is absolutely central to the image. They are, so to speak, the first cute nation. And this is this kind of ambivalent, indefinable, as I say, species, good, bad, masculine, feminine, and so on, image is what cute is most centrally about in the modern world, in the post-war world. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Thank you. You just define Hello Kitty halfway between a cat and a girl. And so it opened to me a question about anthropomorphism in your book, which is both problematic, but also in the very end of this chapter, I understand it could be interpreted like a way to stay between 2 dimensions, positively between 2 dimensions, between animal and human, between vegetal and human, between object and human. Could you go in depth with this?
With respect to Hello Kitty and anthropomorphism.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think at this point it's worth saying that many people, criticize the aesthetic of cute, and I'm going to answer Camilla's question, but on the grounds that it's anthropomorphic. It's a kind of narcissistic appropriation of the animal world to make it human, so to speak. I mean, it's an imposition of power. It's a kind of imperialistic project. You would be surprised how much extremely harsh criticism there is of this, not because it's trivial, but because it's anthropomorphic, because it's imposing this kind of, human form on what is not human. But I see it, I mean, it can be that, but I see it actually rather differently, which is that it's challenging the whole way in which the world has been seen and still is seen in terms of power relations. So everything is a matter of when we discuss, for example, relations between 2 people, between couples, or relations between countries, it doesn't matter. The tendency is always to analyze it and criticize it in terms of the power. And I see, and by the way, speaking as a philosopher now, that's something that originated in the 17th century with the great Dutch-Spanish philosopher Spinoza, Dutch-Spanish-Portuguese philosopher Spinoza. The idea that we understand the world in terms of the power relations between people. And it goes all the way through people like Nietzsche to Foucault. And I think that cute, the aesthetic of cute, is actually contrary to the sort of this critique that it's violent anthropomorphism, is actually an attempt to exit a paradigm of power and to see the world, as it were, to see the world in different terms. And, as I said before, post-war in peaceable terms.
Thank you. Well, another concept that is very strong in this book is about the cute and the uncanny.
Cute and what?
And the uncanny. Uncanny. Yeah. The cute with a sense of uncanny emerges with a situation that mesmerize us despite their unset in nature, from context or subjects we find familiar, even though they might scare us. The boundaries between what is familiar and what is unsettling are so blurred that they become invisible to us sometimes. Could you explain us why we are so attracted by the effects of the cute with the uncannies and provide some examples?
So I mentioned actually the uncanny before in passing. I think we're attracted to, so the uncanny, as I say, is defined as, as where the familiar meets the unfamiliar. So, or where, say, a noise that's familiar cannot be explained by anything that's familiar. It's the cause must be unfamiliar. So, for example, if you hear you're in a completely empty room and suddenly you hear the creaking of a floorboard, but you see nobody. So you go, is this a ghost? Or did I really hear it? That is a typically uncanny feeling. So something, familiar is going on. You're hearing, you're in an old house, you're hearing the creaking of a floorboard, but you don't see anybody. And we're naturally intrigued, slightly frightened maybe, but we're naturally intrigued by familiar phenomenon, by something familiar, which doesn't seem to have a familiar cause. That's basically sort of very briefly what the uncanny is about. And as I say, what is one of the reasons why I think this kind of cute I'm talking about is so attractive is precisely because it's not clear what's going on. Something familiar looks like it's happening. We see a cat, or we see a mouse, like Mickey Mouse, for example. But they have an unfamiliar kind of bearing. They go about life in a way that mostly a mouse doesn't, or a cat doesn't. They seem to be partly human. They seem to have human emotions. And so that is the kind of zone where what we're used to seems to become blurred into what we're not used to. And that is really what the uncanny is about. I think you'll find that most, this is one of the reasons why cute objects have been so successful.
Thank you, Ken. One of the power of the cute is its ability to stay perfectly poised between two dualities, in the middle of two dualities between good and evil, ugly and beauty and ugliness, and so on. Well, in a society where people are forces with accelerated paces, rhythms, and in which we are compelled, and which compels us to continue changes. Do you think that this phenomenon of cute widespread so deeply in our society because it is a kind of symbol of this uncertainty of our generations?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I think essentially the modern world became, one of the ways of viewing the world that's become very common, maybe very desired, is that, things are uncertain. Even in physics, you have the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you have the fact that you can know the velocity but not the position of a particle at any one time. Uncertainty is a feature, almost an aesthetic feature, I think. It's not just a matter of science, of the modern world, And as I said before, things that were usually separated into clear categories and usually clear opposites have been collapsed. And, you know, we have that phenomenon most recently with the collapse of clear gender opposites, where you now have a spectrum. We have the collapse of thousands of years dating from the Bible, but also in other cultures, where the human being is seen as entirely distinct from the animal kingdom, and we now see the human being as a kind of animal. And so I think that this idea that the world is fundamentally uncertain, that we can never get down to a fundamental reality where we go, you know, that is the fundamental reality, that it can explain everything. I think that's deeply ingrained now in our way of thinking. And, you know, arguably this came from the collapse of a religious worldview in which, you know, values were given, in which beauty was given, in which truth, all these things were out there. And increasing, you know, obviously since the 18th century, we start to talk about my values, your values. I legislate my values. They come out of who I am. They're not out there in the world. Similarly, beauty is not regarded as something out there in the world. It's something that I judge. I judge this to be beautiful, but not that. And you might judge something totally different. And this was, you know, even truth. I mean, people nowadays talk about my truth and your truth, as we know. So truth is not regarded as... So increasingly, as... I hope this is okay. I mean, I'm talking a bit, you know, here as someone from a philosophical point of view, but increasingly as the world became pulled into the human subject and out of, you know, an objective, unchanging world out there, what was out there became uncertain. And I think that was the origin of, it was really originated in the collapse of, so to speak, the divinely given world, and the increasing subjectivization of the world, to the point where there can be as many points of view on these questions as there are human beings. And I think this particular aspect of cute, but many other things about the modern world, you know, express this new way of looking at the world, which is also a new aesthetic. Is that an answer, or would you like to probe that?
No, it's an answer.
Okay. Well, push back if you want.
Well, coming back to Japan, in your discussion of the Kawaii Empire, which is a part of the book in which you concentrate your analysis on the Japan Empire, you illustrate the phenomenon of cuteness using various contemporary artworks. Sorry, I have to read it because my memory is not so good. From paintings and drawings of Yoshimoto Nara, sculptures by Takashi Murakami, animation from Studio Ghibli, to the phenomenon of cosplaying, where cuteness is performed and personified by the kawaii ambassadors. The progression goes from two-dimensional form of cuteness to the physical person, and ultimately back to politics and the state. The cute aesthetic transcends the boundaries of a frame and fetish. It becomes propaganda and costume. The Chinese artist Cao Fei, in her work A Cosplayer, emphasizes how cosplayers straddle two dimensions, the realm of imagination, where they take refuge, and urban and familiar reality they inhabit and seek to escape. What's intriguing about this project is observing how cosplayers live when they aren't embodying their characters, whether they are at home with their parents or simply taking the subway. Do you believe that the practice of cosplaying can be defined as cute due to its ability to exist halfway between imagination and reality?
So does everybody know what cosplaying is? Yeah, I mean, yeah, right, okay. Unless you want to give I mean, this is one of the great experts on cosplaying, so you want to give a definition just so, for those who might not know what it means?
Yes, cosplayer is a term which is a contraction between two words, costume and players. And it refers to all those those people who used to wear the characteristic, the costume, and also the gestuality of a character, a specific character that could came from or an anime series or other kind of situation, which is, by the way, a pre-existent character. And yeah, this is the definition of a cosplayer.
Great. Okay, thank you. So basically, the beginning of Kamilia's question was referring to the, I don't know if they're still there, but the Japanese Foreign Ministry used to have 3 ambassadors, as they were called, ambassadors of cute. And they were 3 young women, I think they were aged around 18, who dressed up, each of them differently, in, you know, extremely cute costumes. I mean, some contemporary, some 19th century or 18th century European and so on. And they had their hair in different colors, and they were literally, they were ambassadors, you know, like the ambassador to Rome, so to speak. I mean, they were international ambassadors for their country to promote Japan as a cute country, as I was referring to before, to promote its sense of being a peaceful country that would never again attack its neighbors or engage in that kind of violence. And that was an explicit policy. And this is, so they were cosplaying. The question, which I've now, I think, forgotten, but the
I can repeat if you want.
Maybe you can repeat the question.
Do you think that the way of living by cosplayer, which is between reality and fiction, can be considered a kind of cute way to live their existence, their lifestyle, their...
Yeah, no, so I think cosplaying, yes, that was the question. I think cosplaying is a great example of what I'm talking about, because it's precisely this, you know, crossing of borders between one established way of being and another established way of being. It's this uncertainty about who they are and even whether they sincerely mean what they're doing. I mean, they're dressing up, they're becoming different characters, but, you know, to what extent are they, so to speak, sincere about it? And this is this brings me to a very important factor of cuteness, which is also that, you know, and it's particularly true in the West, where we've had this cult of sincerity since the 18th century as well. In other words, you're supposed to show exactly what you feel. What you say should reflect what you feel. But who knows what these cute figures we've been referring to actually feel? And does it even matter whether we know? There's an uncertainty there at the heart of it. And I think that to the extent that cosplaying remains playful, it's an absolutely perfect example of cute. I think the moment it becomes extremely serious, I mean, cute is essentially a playful way of giving expression to the indeterminacy of the world, I would say in one sentence. So the moment cute becomes too serious, you know, too much a kind of like a message, it loses its power. It has to be in itself playful. So cosplaying has to be playing. But I think it's a perfect example, yes, of exactly what I'm talking about.
Personification of cuteness.
Yes, the personification of cuteness, yeah.
Yeah, and okay. Another question, which is which is a kind of cosplaying, but it's not cosplaying, it's about face filter. What do you think about the widespread of self-portrait filtered by face filter who can transform us in puppies, animals, sweet animals, deformation, they can deform us and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this can be extremely cute, providing, as I said, there is an element of play about it. I mean, if there's a face filter, well, and the character has to be, the character itself has to have a certain gentleness or harmlessness in order to be cute. I mean, if someone, you know, dresses up or or has a face filter that makes them look like Adolf Hitler, I don't think any of us would find that cute. So it's really the kind of personality that they become. Face filtering as such has always happened, I guess. I mean, people have always adjusted their image in order to present a certain face to the world. I mean, that's in a sense not new. What's new is the extraordinary possibilities for this that are created now by digital technology and by the media, the ability to disseminate, and the variety of characters one can assume. So, you know, that dovetails with the idea, I was talking just now that, you know, since the 18th century we've been able to decide, you know, our values and beauty and goodness and so on, but we can also, of course, decide increasingly our identity. And, you know, the face filter gives enormous scope to being able to decide who we want, I mean, what kind of identity we want other people to see us as. Now, this goes only so far because it's still an extremely sensitive area and we don't yet know what the rules are on that when it comes to ethnicity. So gender is now established, which it wasn't 20 years ago. It was very controversial. You can be anything, and you can change it from day to day, as many people do, in terms of what you identify as. But whether you're allowed to identify as any ethnic group is much more sensitive, and the rules are not yet clear. Personally, I think that in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, that will be possible. I think that's the trend of history, but I think that's where the limit now lies to, so to speak, face filtering.
Yes, face filter is a good... It's a good way to experiment ourselves, our imaging online on social media, and also our interspecies self. But yes, as I said, face filter can allow us to manipulate our image. We become animals, vegetable, potatoes, and so on. So this is another way, I mean, very fast way of being anthropomorphic, to put our identity on something, our human identity, our human narcissistic way to another kind of species.
I would say it's potentially more egalitarian than that. So it's more equal. I mean, in a sense, we humans are then also adopting the images of, you know, animals or vegetables or whatever it is. So I think it also potentially gives expression to, you know, this idea that we are part of the animal, and some people would say even vegetable world. I mean, to the extent there are people who think, you know, vegetables have consciousness. So I think it can work both ways.
Well, talking again about anthropomorphism, in cute is a phenomenon that can lead to power imbalances and a sort of narcissistic humanization of the world. Today, we also observe the growing trend of creating anthropomorphic hybrid images using artificial intelligence. These images, often generated by algorithms, seems to further blur the boundaries between the human and non-human world. How do you believe the traditional concept of cute is influenced by this new frontier of AI-driven anthropomorphism?
These are big questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only think that AI is going to accelerate everything I'm talking about because it enables us to manipulate exactly our image and our identity and internally what we feel ourselves to be in pretty much any direction, and to change all the time. So, I mean, that's another thing that's very new and that Cute expresses, is that we don't need to have a fixed identity. I mean, just like we don't need to have a fixed gender, but I mean, in any respect. We don't need to have a fixed identity, we don't need to have a fixed species. And, you know, I think eventually things like nationality will come to seem terribly old-fashioned. So AI can only accelerate really every aspect of the phenomenon that I'm talking about. And I'm only talking about Cute as an expression of these much larger historical developments, you know, as I say, such as the collapse of these traditional opposites, and the sense that there is no fixity. Well, that feeds again into the uncertainty point that we were discussing before. There is just no, there's not only do we see no fixity in the world, we don't see any need for fixity in who we are. So it maybe raises very interesting questions about, you know, selfhood and who I am, who I need to be. I can be much more polymathic in my identity and in my self-image. So yes, I think it can only accelerate every trend we've been talking about.
Okay. The second question related to this topic is also very hard. What implications could this have for human perception of power dynamics among natural objects, artificial beings, and animals? Relating to the Cute, of course.
Yes. Well, I've already said that I think, I mean, one of the central aspects of Cute is that it exits the kind of way of seeing the world entirely in terms of dynamics of power. Now, that's still very strong. I mean, all the current debates, for example, about gender and race are entirely discussed in terms of relations of power. Old relations of power giving way to new relations of power, and, you know, relations between men and women, and relations between, I mean, that is the dominant way of understanding the world. I think Cute already, for the reasons I've already given, you know, the desire after the violence of the First and Second World Wars to try to find a way of being that was less governed by power dynamics. I think Cute is a way of exiting that, and that applies as well to our relations with the animal and the vegetable world. It's just one manifestation of that drive. I'm not saying obviously it's the only one, but it's one. I think it does account for why it touches something very deep in us, and it's not just something trivial and unimportant that we can just neglect as too stupid, you know, just too infantile to be worth analyzing. I mean, one of the things, just, you know, that Cute objects. So I said before that one criticism that's often made is, or Kamilia also said that, is the anthropomorphization, which means it's a form of us exerting power over Cute objects. And that's one frequent criticism of it. But actually, Cute objects, if you think about it, also have the reverse role. They have power over us. So the phenomenon of the mascot is exactly one where you have a Cute object. It's always something small and mignon that is seen as protective. Now, many people, and there have been surveys, sociological surveys about this, many people, including adults, this is by no means also just kids, see Hello Kitty as protective. Some of the world's most powerful forces, their mascots, I mean, the mascot of the American Navy, which is the most powerful navy in the world, is a goat. It's not a lion or a, you know, or some very powerful animal. And I think that's very significant. If I return to Japan, you know, after that devastating earthquake they had in 2016, you remember when the Fukushima reactor, collapsed, and I mean the really terrible one they had a few years ago. The mascot, the local people who were most traumatized by this, who'd lost their homes and lost many of their loved ones, they turned to a mascot to protect them, and it was called Kumamon. And there's a fantastic picture. There are fantastic pictures of the Emperor of Japan coming to visit this devastated area and bowing to this figure of Kumamon, who's this harmless bear-like mascot. I mean, so power works both ways, is what I'm saying. The mascot is precisely always harmless as a creature, and yet it's chosen to exercise protective power over human beings. So it's part of the complexity to which cute things give voice. In this case, the complexity of who actually has the power, the viewer or the cute object.
Thank you. Well, talking about art aesthetic and maybe sincerity, which is the difference between the kitsch and the cute?
Well, that's another good question, which is, what is the difference between kitsch and cute? And I would say the difference is this, that kitsch is always returning us to the familiar. So a kitschy object, let's say one of those, if you go to Pisa, you can buy thousands of leaning towers of Pisa in stalls. Or pictures of, statues of Father Christmas or something. These are kitsch for me. I mean, there's nothing ambivalent about them, there's nothing uncanny about them, there's nothing uncertain about what they represent. So kitsch is actually a way of mass reproducing familiar images very shortly, in very short. Cute is, well, that's what I've been saying throughout this whole discussion, that cute is fundamentally about giving voice to uncertainty. So I would say that is the big difference between the two. Yeah. Any questions from the audience? Questions?
Okay. We are going towards the end of our speech, dialogue. Any sneak peeks about future projects or
about future? Well, future
about
projects.
The future. What's next?
I'm currently writing two new books. One is the third volume of my Philosophy of Love, and it's actually related to this because it's basically about why did the child become the new supreme object of love? I mean, how did childhood become sacred? Because it wasn't for most of human history. It's a very recent thing. And I think, by the way, that's also a factor in the rise of cute. But it's basically about childhood and the sacred. And how did it happen? And why did it happen? And has it happened? If you think about it, the number one area for desecration these days, which is whereas once it would be to enter the inner sanctum of the temple, which only the high priest was allowed, or somebody, of appropriate standing. Now it is desecrating the child by abuse, whether it's physical, mental, sexual, or otherwise. And I think this is an extremely important historical phenomenon. It has not always existed, and people think it has always existed. It hasn't. It's extremely recent, dating from about the end of the 19th century. And my other book is on procrastination. So the question there is, we all procrastinate, and I'm not talking about why we don't clean out the fridge or do some chore, boring task. I'm talking about why can we have supreme goals in life, which we say, in order to have lived a life well, to have lived a good life, these are my values, these are my goals, and yet we don't pursue them. We pursue anything except them. So that's my other book. But I would love to hear any questions from the audience if anyone wants to ask. I mean,
yes.
We have a few more minutes.
Are there any questions among the audience?
Or objections or anything? Okay.
If not, I've got a very weird question if nobody...
Okay, so you can ask another question.
Okay. Well, do you think that could exist in some way a form of abstractions of cuteness, of the concept of cuteness that could be applied to various situations?
What do you mean by
Or these
abstraction?
abstraction, something which is not more related to a form, because one of the very first questions was about the form of cute, but more related about the attitude of the cuteness, how to be cuteness without showing it.
I'm sorry, I'm being slow. Can you repeat?
Yeah, sorry.
How to be
sorry for my
cute
English.
without showing it?
Without showing the cuteness, be cute without showing the cuteness, a kind of abstraction of
okay.
an attitude or a...
You mean, is cute necessarily performative?
Yes, or shown in some way, like with an image, or with
Right.
something.
No, that's a
or
very good question. So you mean,
Or could be just an attitude,
could one be privately, as it were, could one have a private identity as cute and yet not want to perform it? Not want to show
yes,
it? Is that
this
what
is a
you
way,
mean?
yeah.
That's a very good question. I never thought about it, but my instinct would be to say no, cute is fundamentally performative.
Related to a form.
It's related to an identity that you want to project and be seen by others. So I can have many aspects to my identity that are private, that I don't need to perform to you and show to you, or to anybody, even my most intimate, even my spouse or my closest friends. But if I adopt a cute, if I see myself as cute or wanting to be cute or wanting to be perceived in that way, I think I have to want you to see me in that way. I think if I just thought of myself in that way, it would be irrelevant. It's one of those identities that must be performed. But that's a great question. If that was your question, that's how I understood it. I never really thought about. But I think instinctively I would say yes, it's something that you have to, it's something that needs an audience. It's not something that can be, so to speak, a private language. It must be shared, and and you want it to be perceived. So maybe it relates to your questions before about cosplaying or, image manipulation.
Thank you. Maybe now in the public there are some questions. Nobody?
There's a question there.
Yes, there is a question.
Okay. What do you think about the use of cute in the social media?
In what?
In the social media. And do you think there was an evolution of the concept of cute related to the evolution of the communication media?
Basically, I think undoubtedly social media has been an enormous amplifier of the phenomenon. There are literally countless websites where people present themselves in different cute guises, partly through cosplaying, but also just, with just experimenting with different cute appearances. I think the phenomenon itself is more deeply rooted, as I explained. It existed, long before social media came along. And it was very explicit when it developed. For example, I'll just say this in a bracket, not related to your question, but but before the Second World War, and I told you I date the rise mainly from the Second World War. Before the Second World War, Mickey Mouse was a very aggressive little creature. He was a very nasty fellow. And Walt Disney, who was a genius of marketing and sensing where the world was, the zeitgeist, Walt Disney changed him after the Second World War into this cute little figure that runs about, gets put on by bigger and more powerful creatures, but ultimately wins partly through cunning of vulnerability. And he famously used to put stickers on his designers' doors saying, "Keep it cute!" exclamation mark. So that's just to say, I think, to repeat that it has very deep roots in something to do with the post-war zeitgeist. But I think undoubtedly, yes, social media has hugely amplified exactly what we were talking about in this last question, the ability to seek an audience, to project, to find an audience for your changing cute image. Yeah, without doubt. There was a...
You have said that cuteness needs to be performed by people and objects. But my question is, why people want, in your opinion, to perform always more cuteness by cosplays and face filters?
Why they do?
Why they do it?
Well, I think, because, it's clearly a kind of mode of self-presentation that's, I think it proves how attractive it is to our particular time in history to present yourself. I mean, I know this isn't really an answer to your question, but I mean, there's something about the world we live in that makes the presentation of a kind of harm. I mean, you both have a strong individuality in these different things, and at the same time, you're socially acceptable. You're not threatening. So the key, it's often a balance. If I want to project a personality that's very individual and that's very strong, it's strong enough that you notice it above the millions of personalities out there who are also trying to get you to notice them. I have to be very strong, but I also have to be very individual, but I also have to be very unthreatening, because the moment I'm threatening and start using my power, you're not interested. Or I mean, most people, the world finds that disgusting. And that's, again, very different. That relates to my point about power before. There was, for much of human history, the more power you projected, the more you got noticed and the more you got respected. And now, you get respected if you're highly individual and yet come across as unthreatening or even as, in a certain sense, harmless. And I think, the cute aesthetic provides a way of being both. So I would, but I think the reasons why people want to present them as cute are exactly all the reasons I've been talking about for the last hour. And it's to do with, that's why I think, cute is interesting, because of what it tells us about the world we live in. So that's also, we all want to be accepted, by the times in which we live. We all need that acceptance. So we adjust ourselves to whatever are the dominant, aesthetics of the time and dominant ways of self-preservation that will both show the individuality that's crucial to at least the modern West, where obviously everyone is an individual who needs to somehow create something entirely unique about themselves, which is very difficult because we're also herd creatures, and yet they need to do that in a way that doesn't make other people feel threatened, but makes other people feel comfortable, actually. Yeah, so that would be broadly.
Any other question?
Hello, good afternoon, Professor. Thank you to be here in Settimo at first. I don't understand maybe a key point of the speech, no? So if sweet and cute is something suspicious with a dark side, or just something to see in a deep way, because it speaks about us as community and human being, about our emotion and so on. Thank you.
I don't know whether I exactly got the question. I heard the word suspicious. I don't think at any point I would say there's anything suspicious about it. I mean, that it's perceived as something suspicious, except by those who are critics and think that it's just stupid and trivial, and you know, it's a terrible sign of how low the modern world has sunk in terms of culture, that we should, I mean, those kind of people are suspicious. Maybe I didn't understand your question. Can you summarize it to me, this gentleman's question?
Yes, he asked you if there is a kind of dark side of the cuteness. I think that it's a kind of what we talk about when we talk about the cute and the sense of uncanny. I think that this is
yes,
the point.
yes. Oh, sorry. You want to clarify?
Sì, mi spiego un attimo in italiano.
Eccolo.
No, perché il titolo anche di oggi
Sì.
era Le cose inquietanti, no?
Sì, sì.
Invece nel titolo originale è solo il potere. Quindi forse era questo il tipo di dubbio che, sentendo poi tutti i contenuti che sono stati portati,
Certo,
mi veniva da chiedere.
Adesso
Solo
io
questo.
dico, yes, this is about the Italian title, because in Italy the subtitle of your book is the perturbingly
yes.
power of the...
Yes, yes.
Com'è il titolo in italiano? Ripetimi. Sottotitolo.
Yes.
Il potere oscuro. Inquietante, ok.
Inquietante, yes, that's right. So it is, I know that we need to stop, but just to say, yes, so in one word, exactly the undecidability, the uncertainty, the uncanniness that I've said a lot about today, that's the disquieting part, right? But not that it's in some ways objectionable or suspicious, that we should be suspicious of it. It's exactly the indeterminacy. We don't know quite where we are.
Okay. Cuteness could have a dark side, but it's not necessary, I think.
Yeah.
Well, so I think that
So
there are any other question? Yes? The last question, the very last.
Yeah, I'll be very short. You talked a lot about the world getting more fluid and uncertain, but with this thing that you want to be perceived as cute in the aesthetic, do you think there's a parallel in that in wanting to be perceived as perfect or perfectionism, especially in body appearances, like people who does plastic surgery or people who modifies their photo for social media? Because I think that the more the world is becoming fluid and uncertain, there's this need of the people to become perceived as perfect without flaws, and maybe that's because the world is so uncertain now that you need to have something very solid and certain in your aspect or in your how are you perceived. Do you think that's
a very, very interesting question. I mean, I think yes. So you're absolutely right. There is a celebration of uncertainty. I mean, gender fluidity and many other things. At the same time, I don't know whether perfect is the word, but yes, I suppose people want to be seen with perfect skin. You know, they get older, they still want to be seen as, you know, looking like 20 and so on. I think that is true. That might be more to do with the cult of youth than with the cute aesthetic. So there's no reason why there shouldn't be many factors operating. I don't see that specifically as related to the desire to appear cute. I see that more as, well, firstly, the whole phenomenon of manipulating your image, which obviously is huge and for which there's huge opportunity now. And secondly, the cult of youth, where we've seen an exact reversal, where the older you were, like it still is in the Confucian cultures in Asia, the older you are, the more respect you command. Now it's the opposite. So I think it's more related to that.
Okay, thank you, Simon, for sharing with us your thoughts. And